The town square had been hastily repurposed into a ritual site, though nothing about it felt sacred. Broken stone and chalked markings formed a rough circle at its center. Arden stood at the front edge of the formation, with his 4 coven members arrayed around him. 2 men, one dressed in crimson Corbin, a tall blonde man whose stature is just as powerful as his spells, the other Marduk, dressed in brown intricately woven fabrics, his spells as ancient as his wisdom. 2 women, Fear, a dark-haired enchantress, her beauty merely a distraction for her cunning nature, so you can't see her strike coming. Then there's Liana, gentle-natured, brown hair always woven beautifully, dressed in yellow, a true master of potions and spell weaving. Above them, the sky was deceptively calm. Soft afternoon light filtered through drifting clouds and lit the square in pale gold, making the urgency feel even more unreal, like something trying to pretend it wasn't about to go wrong. "Keep the sigils powered," Arden said quickly, eyes fixed on the sigil structure forming in the air. His voice was controlled, but there was tension underneath it now. "If it stabilizes, it will hold the entire town perimeter." "It should already be stabilizing," Lana snapped back, but her hands were shaking as she pushed power into the circle. The spell responded. At first, it looked like success. Threads of light, thin, hues of gold, orange, red, purple and blue, delicate as spun glass, unfurled from each of them and interwove above the circle. The pattern formed cleanly, beautifully even, like a perfect geometric bloom unfolding in midair. For half a heartbeat, there was relief. Then the air twisted. It wasn't loud. It was worse than loud. It was wrong. The light in the weave stuttered, as if something had blinked inside it. The circle did not expand outward as intended. It tightened. Arden's breath caught. No, that's not. The spell started to invert. The moment it snapped inward, every thread of magic they had extended came back in, all at once, but wrong, corrupted, compressed, and violently unstable. Corbin screamed immediately. It wasn't a shout of warning, it was pure reflexive agony, as if his body had suddenly been forced to hold too much of itself at once. He dropped to his knees, hands clawing at the air like he could physically tear the spell away from his skin. Light pulsed under his arms in rapid, strobing flashes. I can't stop it," he cried, voice cracking. Marduk tried to pull away from the circle, but the sigil pattern followed him like a tether. Wherever he moved, the magic moved with him, tightening further, refusing separation. His breath turned sharp, panicked, uneven. "Cut it! Cut the link!" he shouted, but his voice broke into a scream halfway through the sentence as the energy surged back through him. Liana stumbled backward, eyes wide with shock. "It's feeding back! It's feeding back into us!" she screamed, both hands raised defensively as if she could push it away. Her control spells detonated uselessly against the sigils and slowed instantly. It's inside the weave. The air inside the circle had become unbearable, dense, vibrating, alive. Arden felt it too now, not pain yet. Pressure. Like something enormous was compressing reality itself into the space of their bodies. "Hold it together!" he shouted, but his voice was strained now. He was already forcing counter patterns into the weave, trying to redirect it outward, trying to force it to behave. "Don't break focus. If we lose coherence, it will collapse faster." "It already is," Fear screamed back. Then the first collapse began. Fear doubled over violently, letting out a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite breath. Her hands clawed at her own chest, as if she could physically pry the magic out from inside her. The light under her skin surged brighter, too bright, then flickered violently. I can't, she sobbed, voice breaking into panic. She looked at Arden one last time, not pleading, just terrified. Then she screamed, a raw, full-throated cry that cut through the square and made birds scatter from nearby rooftops. And then her presence simply thinned. Not in a clean, gentle way. In a collapsing, unraveling way, like something being erased while still conscious of itself. She vanished into pale fragments of light that scattered upward and dissolved before touching the ground. Liana immediately broke. "No! No!" she screamed, stumbling as the lattice latched onto her harder in response to the instability. "Get it off me! Get it off!" Her voice rose into something hysterical as she tried to tear herself free from the circle. But the spell followed every movement, tightening with each attempt. Her control shattered completely. "It's in my blood. I can feel it." She dropped to her knees mid-sentence, shaking violently, screaming for help that could not reach her. The air around her pulsed once hard, and then she too began to unravel, her voice cutting off in a sudden, breathless gasp as the energy consumed the rest of her coherence. Silence followed her absence too quickly, as if the world refused to acknowledge how loud she had just been. Marduk was already crawling backward, dragging himself across the stone, leaving streaks of chalk sigils smearing beneath his hands. He was crying now, not even trying to hide it. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he screamed, voice breaking completely. "Make it stop!" Corbin was still standing, but only just. His posture was rigid with strain, every muscle locked as he tried to resist the inward pull of the lattice. His eyes met Arden's. "He lied to us about the stabilization," he choked out. Then he screamed too, short, sharp, involuntary, as the magic surged again, snapping something essential inside him. His body arched as if struck by invisible force, and the light beneath his skin flared violently before dimming out in a rapid collapse. He was gone a moment later. Marduk the last to fall. He had stopped moving altogether now, just curled on the ground, shaking and whispering broken fragments of words that no longer formed sentences. "Please, please." The spell did not answer him. It simply finished what it had started. His voice broke into one final scream, smaller than the others, already fading halfway through, and then he too dissolved into drifting remnants of light that disappeared into nothing before the echo of his panic could fully die. And then there was only Arden. The circle had closed completely now. No more interference. No more resistance. Just him and the collapsing weave. He staggered slightly, breathing hard, eyes wide as he finally understood that there was nothing left to stabilize, only something waiting to finish its course. "What did we do wrong?" he whispered, but it sounded less like certainty and more like refusal. The pressure surged again. This time it was final. His breath caught sharply. His vision flickered at the edges. The world around him began to bleach out, color draining from stone, from sky, from thought itself. The last sensation he registered was not pain anymore, but overwhelming brightness, rising too fast to resist. Then everything went white. The road back to the tower felt longer than he remembered. Not because the distance had changed, but because he had. Months had passed since the day the town square turned into a grave of ashen echoes. Months since the spell failed. Since the air itself had ignited beneath their skin. Since the screams of his coven, his family, had clawed their way into silence. Arden had not returned since. Now, standing at the crest of a low hill overlooking the valley, Arden hesitated. The tower rose in the distance like a wound that refused to heal. It had always been imposing, but now it felt watchful. Carved from pale stone veined with faint blue crystal, the structure spiraled upward in uneven tiers, as though grown rather than built. Arcane sigils crawled across its surface, shifting subtly in the light, wards layered upon wards, old and new, some flickering as if recently reforged. Narrow windows glowed dimly with contained magic, and at the tower's peak. The air around it shimmered faintly. Not heat, something else. Residual power. Residual failure. Arden swallowed. Would they let him back in, or would they kill him outright? Since the explosion, the Holy Order has been roaming the area, putting pressure on every nearby coven, enforcing stricter rules, making practicing magic almost a crime, questioning relentlessly on what lead up to the events of that day for some hope of finding who did it, to find answers for an uncalled-for event that took hundreds of lives. The thought twisted in his chest. He had trained here, lived here his whole life, it was home, but one he could not return to out of fear. The tower had once been a place of belonging, harsh, unforgiving, but still home in its own way. Now it might see him as a liability. His boots pressed into the dirt as he took a few cautious steps forward, then stopped again. A flicker of movement near the base of the tower caught his eye. He narrowed his gaze. 5 figures moved towards the old cottage on the lands, a place that no sigil protected and no ward would notice their presence. Their cloaks were travel-worn but not ragged, their posture alert. Not merchants. Not pilgrims. Something about them felt coordinated. Waiting, a 6th figure emerged from the cottage's entrance. A mage. Arden instinctively stepped back into the cover of a twisted tree, pulling his cloak tighter as he watched. The mage's face was obscured by shadow and distance, hood drawn low, but the way they moved, measured, precise, almost severe, the cloak achingly familiar, his old mentor, the one that gave his coven the protection spell that inverted, someone he could never forgive nor trust ever again, but he couldn't be sure. It sent a flicker of unease through him. They spoke briefly. He couldn't hear the words, only the cadence, short, controlled exchanges. Then one of the 5 strangers produced something small, wrapped in dark cloth. The mage hesitated, then took it. In return, he handed over a narrow case, long, reinforced, etched with containment runes. Arden's breath caught. A trade. At the tower. That alone was wrong. The tower did not trade. It collected, studied, seized if necessary. Anything of arcane significance was meant to be catalogued, controlled, not quietly exchanged on its doorstep. The mage turned slightly as he accepted the object, and for just a moment, the light shifted. Arden stiffened. That posture, the tilt of the head, the faint, habitual stillness before movement. His chest tightened. He couldn't be sure. The robes of masters all looked the same, and the hood concealed too much. The distance was too great. But the possibility alone was enough to root him in place. Before he could act or think further, the exchange ended. The mage retreated back into the cottage without another word. The doors sealed behind him with a low, resonant hum. The 5 strangers didn't linger. They turned and began walking away from the tower, heading down the valley road toward the outer settlements. Arden hesitated only a moment this time. Then he followed. He kept his distance. Years of training and more recent necessity made it easy. He moved along the edges of the road, slipping between brush and shadow, keeping just close enough to track them, just far enough to remain unseen. The group spoke little while on the move, disciplined. That alone told him they weren't ordinary travelers. They passed through one village, then another, never stopping long. By the time the sun dipped low, staining the sky with deep orange and violet, they reached a larger town, a trade crossroads a few miles from the tower's influence. Here, they finally broke formation. They entered a worn but busy tavern near the center of town. Arden circled once, scanning exits, windows, blind spots, then slipped inside. The air was thick with smoke, conversation, and the dull clatter of mugs. Perfect cover. He took a seat near the back, angled just enough to keep the 4 in view without staring. They gathered at a corner table. Food arrived. Drinks followed, and slowly, carefully, their silence began to crack. Riskier than expected, one of them muttered, voice low but edged. Another scoffed. It's the mages. Nowadays, it's always risky. A pause. Then a third voice, quieter, more deliberate. We have a job to do. However risky, they pay us good coin. Besides, we agreed to join their cause. We have no choice now. The witch leaned subtly forward. The way he handled the case, the wards on it, it doesn't feel natural, the speaker continued. That man was high-ranking. In a circle, at least. A fourth voice, gravelly, impatient. Doesn't matter who he was. We got what we needed. Half of what we need, the quieter one corrected. Silence fell again. Then, the other relic is still out there. The words seemed to sink into the room, even though no one else heard them. Arden's pulse quickened. Relic. And now we know where it is, supposedly stronger than the previous one. Another added. A long pause. Then, softer, we find it? Or we're not going to see the light of day for very much longer. You heard what happened to the others that didn't succeed. Another replied, just as quietly. Then we move faster. Arden sat back slowly, his thoughts racing. Powerful relics that someone in the tower is trading for to be used for good or bad. Most likely bad given recent events. Something his master, or possibly his former master, might be involved in. The noise of the tavern returned around him, but it felt distant. They did not linger. The four left the tavern separately at first, one by one, spaced just enough to avoid suspicion before reforming beyond the town's outer road where the lantern light thinned and the night swallowed detail. Arden waited, counting breaths, listening to the rhythm of footsteps fade, then rose and followed. He did not rush. He had learned that lesson the hard way. The road north was not a single path, but a weaving of choices, forks that split into narrow trails, trails that dissolved into open wilderness, stretches where even the idea of a road seemed like a memory rather than reality. The five moved with quiet certainty, never arguing direction, never hesitating for long. They knew where they were going. That alone unsettled him. For 7 days he tracked them. 7 days of distance, patience, and silence. He slept little, ate sparingly, and used what magic he dared. A bend of light to soften his outline at dusk. A whisper of sound dampening beneath his boots. Nothing that would flare. Nothing that could be felt, smelled, or sensed. Because whoever these people were, they were careful. On the second day, one of them doubled back along their trail for nearly an hour, scanning for signs of pursuit. Arden had already anticipated it, masking his path where the ground allowed, moving through rock and stream when he could, making sure he could not be tracked in any way. On the fourth day, they changed pace abruptly, faster, then slower, then stopping entirely for half a day in a dense thicket. Testing, watching, waiting. He stayed still long enough for his muscles to tremble. On the sixth day, the land itself began to change. The trees grew older, their trunks thicker, bark twisted with age. The air cooled, carrying a faint mineral scent, stone and something deeper, something buried. Moss crept over everything. Even the silence felt heavier here, as if the world itself was holding its breath. By the seventh day, they left the last recognizable trail behind. That was when he knew they were close. It was almost nothing. That was what made it so unsettling. The five stopped in a clearing that barely qualified as one, just a slight thinning of ancient trees where light filtered weakly through the canopy. Vines choked the ground, thick and layered, crawling over stones that might have once formed something deliberate, or might have been nothing at all. At first glance, there was no structure. No ruin. No entrance. Just forest. Arden crouched behind the gnarled roots of a fallen tree, narrowing his gaze. Then he saw it. Not directly, but in absence. A section of earth where the growth was wrong. Too uniform. Too still. The vines lay over it, but did not cling the same way. The moss coated it, but thinner, as though reluctant, hidden, deliberately. You would walk past it 100 times and never notice, unless you knew exactly where to look. The five men approached it without hesitation. One of them knelt, brushing aside layers of vine and damp foliage. Another joined, clearing just enough to reveal a surface beneath. Stone. Old beyond easy measure. A door in the ground, sealed tight. It was not ornate, not grand. There were no carvings declaring its purpose, no warnings etched in bold script. Just a massive slab fitted seamlessly into the earth, its edges nearly invisible beneath time and growth. But at its center, a small, perfect indentation, circular, precise, waiting. Slowly, deliberately, one of the five removed the narrow reinforced case from their pack, the same one exchanged at the tower. Even from a distance, he could feel it. A faint hum pressed against his senses, like a tone just beyond hearing. They opened the case. Inside, nestled within layered cloth and containment runes, lay a crystal. It glowed softly, not with steady light, but with something that shifted, pulsed, as though the illumination came from movement within it rather than from its surface. Pale at the edges, brighter toward the core, where something darker seemed to swirl. Unstable. Hungry. Careful, one of them murmured. I know, another replied, though their voice was tighter now. The one holding the crystal stepped toward the door. For a moment, just a moment, they hesitated. Then they placed it into the indentation. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. The instant it settled into place, the world seemed to react. A low vibration rolled through the ground, subtle but undeniable. The air tightened, pressure shifting, as if something vast had just drawn a breath after centuries of stillness. Then the sigils appeared. Not carved, not painted, they emerged. Lines of faint light crawled outward from the crystal's point of contact, spreading across the surface of the stone like veins igniting beneath skin. Intricate patterns unfolded, circles within circles, intersecting geometries, symbols layered over one another in impossible configurations. Ancient magic, old in a way that felt foundational. Arden leaned forward despite himself, eyes wide. The sigils grew brighter, more complex. For a moment, it looked like a standard ward activation, an unlocking sequence, perhaps, or a recognition mechanism. Then the light flickered, once, twice. Then the sigils began to stutter. They glitched. Lines fractured, reformed, overlapped incorrectly. Symbols doubled, then erased themselves, then reappeared in altered forms. The entire pattern began to shift too quickly, as though the magic maintaining it was being forced to recalculate faster than it could sustain. The crystal pulsed, brighter now, hungry. The sigils responded, not by rejecting it, not by shutting down, but by breaking. Not shattering, not failing, breaking down. The patterns began to unravel outward. Lines of light peeled away from the door's surface, stretching, thinning, then snapping into the core of the gem. Consumed. This isn't unlocking, the quieter one said, voice tight with realization. It's destroying the ward. And it was. Layer after layer of protective magic, centuries old, meticulously crafted, was being stripped apart, reduced to raw energy and pulled into the crystal like fuel. The door trembled. Not from resistance, from absence. As if something that had always held it together was simply no longer there. Cracks of dim, dying light traced along its edges. The sigils flickered one last time, then vanished. Silence fell. Heavy. Absolute. The crystal dimmed slightly, its inner glow deepening, richer now, fed. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, with a deep, grinding sound that echoed through the roots of the forest itself, the door shifted. Just a fraction. But enough. Enough to reveal a thin line of darkness beyond. Cold air spilled out, ancient and undisturbed, carrying with it the faint scent of dust and something else. Something old. Something waiting. Arden remained perfectly still, heart hammering in his chest. Whatever lay beyond that door, it had just lost its protection. And something told him. That was exactly the point. He did not move. Not at first. Even after the grinding stone had settled and the narrow opening yawned like a wound in the earth, Arden remained hidden in the roots and shadow, every instinct urging patience over curiosity. The four figures slipped inside without hesitation, their silhouettes swallowed one by the dark beyond the threshold. Then there was only silence. No voices, no footsteps. Just the forest again. A full quarter hour passed before he allowed himself to rise. The entrance loomed closer than it had any right to feel. Up close, the illusion of nature fell apart entirely. The vines did not cling, they draped. The moss did not grow, it rested. The stone beneath was too smooth, too precise, its edges too deliberate to belong to anything but design. And now, with the wards gone, it felt exposed, vulnerable. Or perhaps inviting. He stepped inside, stairs descending sharply. Darkness swallowed him whole. For a moment, he stood still, letting his eyes adjust, resisting the instinct to summon light immediately. Instead, he reached inward, coaxing a faint shimmer to gather at his fingertips, just enough to paint the world in dim outlines without announcing his presence. The corridor stretched ahead. Narrow, uniform, oppressive. The walls were lined, filled with remains. Bones stacked in careful arrangement, rib cages interlocked, skulls set into shallow alcoves, as though placed with reverence or precision. Between them, wrapped in brittle cloth and desiccated beyond recognition, were mummified forms, bodies preserved not by care, but by time and dryness. Row after row, endless, the floor was layered in dust so fine it shifted like ash beneath his steps, though he placed each foot carefully, minimizing sound. He moved forward. Every corridor looked the same. That was the first thing he realized. Not similar. Identical. Each turn led to another stretch of bone-lined walls. Each intersection mirrored the last. There were no markings, no distinguishing features, no variation in design. Even the air felt unchanged from one passage to the next, stale, dry, and heavy with age. It was disorienting. Deliberately so. A maze built not to confuse the body, but the mind. He paused at one junction, glancing left, then right. Both paths stretched into identical darkness. His jaw tightened. Then, faintly, voices echoing. Distorted by distance and stone, but unmistakable. He turned toward the sound and moved. The deeper he went, the stronger the feeling grew. At first, it was just a pressure. Subtle, easy to ignore. Then it became something else. Awareness. Not his own. The air felt occupied. As though the crypt itself was not empty, but simply quiet. Watching. Listening. Waiting. He slowed his breathing, instinctively dampening his presence, pulling his magic inward, coiling it tight so it would not bleed into the space around him. Because something here, something ancient, felt like it might notice. His fingers brushed the wall as he moved, and for a fleeting second, he thought he felt warmth beneath the stone. He pulled his hand away immediately. The voices grew clearer. This way. He turned another corner and stopped. The corridor ahead wasn't the same, not quite. The bones were still there, the walls still lined with the dead, but the arrangement had shifted. Less orderly. Less precise. Some of the skeletal remains had collapsed, others leaned at unnatural angles, as though disturbed not by time, but by movement. The dust here was thinner, disturbed, fresh. He crouched, brushing his fingers lightly across the ground. Footprints. Recent. He followed. The air grew heavier. Not physically, but magically. Each step forward felt like descending deeper into something thick and unseen. His breath slowed, not by choice but by pressure. Even the faint glow at his fingertips flickered, dimming as though the space itself resisted illumination. The walls began to change. Subtly at first. Faint etchings appeared between the bones, lines too deliberate to be cracks, too precise to be natural. Symbols, perhaps, worn down by time, but still carrying the weight of intent. Older. Much older than the outer halls. The voices ahead sharpened, almost there. The corridor ended at a door. Unlike the hidden entrance above, this one was unmistakable. Tall, severe, carved from a darker stone that seemed to drink in what little light existed. Its surface was marked with deep grooves and layered sigils, older than anything he had seen before, their shapes unfamiliar, almost wrong to look at for too long. The door stood open, just enough. Beyond it, darkness, but not the same kind. This darkness had depth, space. Arden approached slowly, every instinct screaming caution, every step measured and silent. He reached the threshold and stopped. Then, carefully, he looked inside. The ground fell away. Not immediately, but close enough to make his breath hitch. Beyond the doorway lay a vast chasm, its edges jagged and uneven, stretching far beyond what his dim light could reveal. The air that rose from it was colder than anything above, carrying a deep, hollow resonance, as though the space itself extended into something immeasurable. Across the gap, faint shapes suggested pathways, narrow stone bridges, broken platforms, remnants of something that had once spanned the void more completely. At the edge of the drop stood the 5 men. They were gathered around another structure, a mechanism built into the stone, half buried, half exposed, its purpose unclear, but its design unmistakably ancient. As he watched, 2 of them pressed against a massive slab set into the wall. Another studied a series of inset symbols nearby, as if to figure out a mechanism. The man worked swiftly, and then a soft click, a rumble. He had in fact been working on figuring out a mechanism. It started turning slowly. Another stood watch, scanning the darkness below, to see where the rumble sound originated from. As it moved, a low sound rose from the depths, not quite a roar, not quite a breath, but something in between. Arden felt it in his chest more than he heard it. A vibration. Deep. Alive. The air thickened further. The presence he had felt in the hall sharpened into something undeniable. Not just ancient. Not just waiting. Aware. He froze where he stood, barely daring to breathe. Below, in the unseen depths of the chasm, something had noticed the door opening, and it was no longer entirely asleep. For a moment, none of them moved. The mechanism shifted, revealing a narrow path ascending from the dark chasm below that curved along the edge of the chasm and led to a raised platform, a crude altar of dark stone that seemed less built and more unearthed. It jutted from the rock like a wound, its surface etched with the same ancient wrong angled symbols that marked the deeper halls. At its center, something small. Insignificant at first glance, an idol, no larger than a clenched fist, carved from a material that refused to reflect the dim light around it. Its shape was vaguely humanoid, but distorted, limbs too long, torso slightly twisted, the suggestion of a face stretched into something that felt more implied than defined. It did not glow, it did not hum, but the air around it bent, subtly, unnaturally. The relic. The 5 men approached cautiously, boots scraping against ancient stone, each step measured despite the tension coiling between them. "That's it," one whispered, voice tight. "Doesn't look like much. It doesn't have to." They circled the altar, keeping distance from the idol, as though proximity alone might trigger something unseen. "Who takes it?" the gravel-voiced one asked. Silence followed, not hesitation born of fear, but calculation. "You're fastest," another said. "If something goes wrong, if..." A third cut in sharply. "We knew this wasn't going to be clean." The quieter one, the same who had questioned the tower, spoke next, low and steady. "We don't all need to touch it." One takes it. "The rest cover if something happens." A grim pause. No one argued. Finally, one of them stepped forward. He was taller than the others, broader through the shoulders, movements controlled but edged with impatience. He flexed his fingers once, twice, then reached toward the idol. For a fraction of a second, everything held its breath. His hand closed around it. The sound that followed did not belong in the world. It tore through the chasm, like something alive being dragged across the fabric of reality itself, a wail so deep, so layered with anguish and rage, and something far older than either, that it bypassed the ears entirely and drove straight into bone. Arden staggered back from the doorway. Below, something moved. Not quickly. Not at first, but undeniably. A shape peeled itself from the darkness, vast and wrong, rising from depths that should not have held anything living. It climbed. If that word could even describe it. A long, serpentine body coiled and uncoiled against the jagged walls of the chasm, its length vanishing into shadow below. Along its sides, protruding at uneven intervals, were limbs, too many, too sharp, jointed like legs, but ending in jagged claw-like points that dug into the stone as it ascended. They scraped. They screamed against the rock. And its head, human, or what had once been. A decayed face stretched over something far larger than it should fit, skin drawn tight in places, split in others, exposing glimpses of something darker beneath. Its mouth hung open too wide, jaw unhinged in a silent echo of the wail that still reverberated through the air. Empty sockets turned upward. Then, locked onto the platform, on them, on the relic. Arden did not think. He turned and ran. The corridor beyond the door swallowed him immediately, the oppressive sameness crashing down on his senses as panic clawed its way into his chest. Left, right, forward. It didn't matter. Every path looked identical. Behind him, the wail shifted, sharpened, followed by the unmistakable sound of movement. Fast now. Too fast for something that large. And then, screams. Human. Close. Back at the altar, chaos erupted. Move! Someone shouted as the creature surged upward with horrifying speed, its jagged limbs tearing into the stone as it propelled itself onto the platform in a blur of motion. The one holding the idol stumbled back, nearly dropping it. It's guarding it. Run. They didn't wait for agreement. They sprinted over the narrow path, boots pounding against ancient stone as the creature lunged after them. It moved wrong. Too fluid for its size. Its body coiled and snapped forward, limbs striking and pulling in rapid succession, closing distance with terrifying efficiency. One of them glanced back, a mistake. The creature's head snapped toward him instantly, its movement jerking, unnatural, as though guided by something beyond muscle and bone. It lunged. He barely dodged, the jagged edge of a limb slicing through the air where he had been a heartbeat before. "Don't look back," someone screamed. They reached the doorway, burst into the corridor, and the maze swallowed them. Arden stumbled through another turn, breath ragged, heart slamming against his ribs. The screams echoed around him now, 5 voices, overlapping, panicked, disoriented. "It's behind us." "This way," one of the men shouted, but the reply came from the wrong direction. He had taken the wrong corridor, separating him from the group. He kept running. Alone now. Arden heard him before he saw him. Footsteps, close, coming fast. He turned just as the man burst around the corner ahead, eyes wide, face pale beneath sweat and dust. They froze for a split second, staring at each other. Recognition flickered, not of identity, but of shared terror. "Run," the man shouted, already moving again. Arden didn't argue. He turned and ran with him. Behind them, the sound came, closer than it should have been, scraping, clawing. That same layered, bone-deep wail, now sharper, more focused, hunting. The creature surged into the corridor behind the man, its long body twisting unnaturally to fit the narrow space, limbs punching into the walls and floor as it dragged itself forward with terrifying speed. It did not slow. It did not hesitate. It had chosen. And it was gaining. The other 3 voices faded into the distance, their path diverging somewhere deeper in the maze. But for Arden, for the man beside him, there was no escape behind them. Only the labyrinth ahead. And the thing that hunted them through it. Panic stripped everything else away. Names didn't matter. Sides didn't matter. Whatever lines had been drawn between them above ground, allegiances, suspicion, purpose, collapsed under the weight of something far more immediate. Survival. The man met Arden's eyes for half a heartbeat, chest heaving. Fear lay bare and unguarded. No words were needed. They ran. The corridors twisted around them like a living thing. Left. Right. Another turn. Another identical stretch of bone-lined walls that blurred together under the frantic rhythm of their steps. Dust kicked up behind them in choking clouds, their boots slipping slightly on the fine, ash like layer coating the floor. "This way," the man shouted, veering sharply. Arden followed without question, behind them. It came. The scraping was louder now, closer, accompanied by that same hollow, warping wail that seemed to pull at the edges of thought itself. It wasn't just sound, it was presence, pressing in, invasive, like something reaching into the space where their minds existed and testing the boundaries. Arden clenched his jaw, forcing focus. "Don't stop," the man barked. "I'm not planning to." Arden screamed back. They rounded another corner, and the corridor narrowed suddenly, the walls pressing closer, the ceiling dipping just enough to force them to hunch as they ran. A mistake. A trap. Arden felt it a fraction of a second before it happened. "Wait," he shouted, both men stopping instantly. Too late. The creature surged forward. Not from behind, from above, through a tunnel designed for it, its own maze it uses to hunt. Its long, coiling body slammed into the corridor ahead of them with bone-shaking force, jagged limbs punching into the stone walls as it dropped into their path, cutting them off in a single fluid motion. They skidded to a halt, and it struck. The impact was brutal. One of its misshapen limbs lashed out, catching both men at once, slamming into their bodies with crushing force. The world spun as they were thrown sideways, colliding hard with the wall before hitting the ground in a tangle of limbs and breathless pain. Arden's vision flashed white. Air refused to come back into his lungs. Then, movement. Too fast. The creature lunged. Its head snapped forward, the decayed, stretched face opening far wider than any human jaw should allow, rows of uneven, broken teeth bared as it drove toward them. Arden rolled instinctively, the creature's bite slamming into the stone where his head had been a heartbeat before. The impact cracked the wall, fragments of bone and dust exploding outward. "Move!" he choked. The other man scrambled to his feet, just as one of the creature's limbs came down. He twisted, not fast enough. The jagged, weight-bearing limb crashed into him, knocking him off balance and sending him sprawling again. Another limb followed, slamming down beside him, blocking his escape. Arden forced himself up, pain screaming through his side. The corridor had become chaos. The creature filled it, its massive, serpentine body coiling and shifting in ways that made no sense, limbs striking, retracting, repositioning faster than something that size should be able to move. They dodged. Barely. A jagged leg slammed down inches from Arden's foot, cracking the stone beneath. He jumped back, raising his arm as another limb swept toward him. It clipped his shoulder, sending him stumbling again. The man shouted something, cut off by a grunt of pain. Arden turned and saw it. The creature's foot, if it could be called that, had pinned the man to the ground. A twisted mass of bone and hardened flesh, pressing down across his torso, forcing the air from his lungs as he struggled, hands pushing uselessly against it, the creature's head lowered. Slow, deliberate, fixated. The hollow sockets of its decayed face seemed to deepen, the darkness within them pulling inward, dragging at the very space around them. Arden felt it. A pull. Not physical, something deeper. Like being seen in a way that stripped everything away. "Get it off," the man gasped, voice breaking. Arden hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, then he moved. He stepped forward, drawing what magic he could without thinking, without measuring. His hand ignited. Not with a blaze, but with a concentrated, furious heat that wrapped his fist in flickering flame. He lunged and struck. The impact cracked through the corridor. His burning fist connected with the creature's jaw, what remained of it, driving the head sideways with a force that reverberated up his arm. Flame flared on contact, licking across decayed flesh, the smell of scorched rot filling the air. The creature recoiled. Not far, but enough. Its head jerked back, the wail shifting into something sharper, more focused. Anger. For a moment, the pressure on the man lifted. He gasped, dragging in air, but the creature's attention had changed. It turned toward the man trying to escape its grasp. The way the creature's focus snapped into place, locking onto the other man with terrifying precision. The opportunity opened. Clear. Unmistakable. Run. Arden didn't think. Didn't speak. Didn't warn. He turned and fled. If he didn't, he wouldn't make it out alive. The corridors blurred again, but this time Arden didn't try to choose. He ran on instinct, on desperation, on the raw animal drive to put distance between himself and what he had just seen. Behind him, the man screamed. Not once, not briefly, but continuously, frantic, breaking. The kind of sound that tore itself apart as it left the throat. Arden didn't look back. Couldn't. The screams followed him through the maze, echoing off identical walls, bouncing from corridor to corridor until direction lost all meaning. Then they cut off. Abruptly, silence crashed in their place. Arden stumbled around another turn and stopped. Breath ragged, chest burning. The corridor opened, widened. And there, at the end, the doorway. The same dark stone, the same carved edges, the threshold leading back to the chasm. He stared at it, disoriented. Impossible. He had run blindly, turned without thought. And yet, here it was. The air was colder here, heavier. And from beyond the doorway, the vast emptiness of the chasm breathed once more into the corridor. Behind him, nothing. No footsteps, no scraping, no wail. But the silence felt wrong, too complete, too expectant. Arden stood there, alone, chest heaving, staring at the threshold he hadn't crossed once before. He didn't stop at the threshold this time. The moment his instincts aligned with the shape of the place, the widening corridor, the pull of cold air, the faint echo of open space, he moved. Fast, committed. The doorway to the chasm loomed ahead, and he crossed it in a breath. The vastness opened around him again. The chasm yawned wide and immeasurable, its depths swallowing light and sound alike. The narrow stone path clung to the edge like an afterthought, leading back toward the altar platform where the relic had rested moments ago, or where it had been taken. He ran along the edge, boots scraping dangerously close to the drop, breath ragged, lungs burning. Behind him, it returned. At first, it was just a feeling, then a sound. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Scraping, clawing, ascending. The creature was coming back, tracking him. Damn it, he muttered. He spun at the doorway, heart hammering, hands already moving before thought fully formed. He couldn't outrun it again. Not through the maze. Not now. He thrust his palm toward the doorframe, fingers splaying as he forced magic outward. Not carefully, not subtly, but fast. A sealing ward, rough, improvised, but anchored in urgency. Vile, that's core. The words snapped from his tongue, sharp and forceful, as threads of golden light burst from his palm and crawled across the stone. The frame ignited. Lines of radiant gold etched themselves into the doorway, forming a lattice of intersecting sigils that locked into place with a sharp, resonant hum. The air tightened instantly, the threshold shimmering as the ward took hold. Not permanent, not even stable, but enough. He didn't wait to test it. He turned and sprinted toward the altar. The platform was unchanged. The idol was gone, but something remained. A faint glow hovered above the stone where it had rested, residual magic, disturbed, lingering like heat after flame. It flickered unevenly, unstable, already beginning to fade back into the ambient pull of the chasm. His eyes locked onto it. He dropped to one knee, shrugging his satchel off his shoulder with hurried precision. His fingers moved through its contents without looking, trained familiarity guiding him until they closed around a small object. A pendant. Simple. Unassuming. A thin chain looped through a small, smooth stone etched with barely visible runes. He brought it up, holding it just above the fading glow. "Stay with me," he muttered, more to himself than the magic. Then he began. The chant was low at first, breath tight, words forming through instinct and memory rather than calm recitation. "Ellerin, Ves Vel," Cora Ven. The glow reacted immediately. It trembled, then stretched. Thin strands of residual energy peeled away from the altar's surface, drawn upward toward the pendant like threads pulled by an unseen force. He focused, tightening his grip. The strands snapped into the stone. The pendant flared faintly, its runes igniting one by one as the captured magic sank into it, embedding itself deep within the construct. Not the relic itself, but its echo, its signature. Enough. Enough to find it again. Behind him, the ward shuddered. A violent impact slammed into the doorway, the golden lattice flaring bright in response. The sound cracked through the chamber like thunder. He flinched but didn't stop. Come on, another slam. Harder. The ward flickered. Hairline fractures of dimming light traced along its edges. It wouldn't hold. Not for long. The last strands of magic snapped free from the altar and sank into the pendant. The glow vanished. Gone. The stone in his hand dimmed, but deeper now, heavier with purpose. He exhaled sharply and shoved it back into his satchel. No time. Another impact. The ward buckled. The golden light warped inward, distorting under the force pressing against it from the other side. A sound followed, not just a wail. Something sharper, closer. Right there, he moved. Dropping to the ground, he pulled a piece of chalk from his satchel and began drawing with frantic precision at his feet. Sigils. Not simple ones, not clean ones, but functional. A teleportation circle, compressed, improvised, unstable by necessity. Lines intersected, curves formed, symbols layered over one another in tight, overlapping geometry, each stroke driven by urgency rather than perfection. Hold, just hold, he muttered under his breath. The chalk scraped fast against stone. The ward screamed. A crack split the golden lattice. Light burst outward, then snapped back. Another hit. Stronger! The entire doorway trembled. The sigils at his feet were nearly complete now, but not yet active. The ward shattered. The explosion of light and force ripped through the doorway as the creature burst through, its massive form slamming into the chamber in a violent surge of motion. Its hollow gaze snapped immediately to Arden. Locked. He didn't hesitate, didn't look up, didn't acknowledge it. He finished the final stroke and began the chant. Vel, there, en. The sigils ignited. Brilliant. Blinding. Lines of white gold light surged through the chalk markings, flooding the circle with energy as the air above it twisted, folding inward on itself. The creature lunged. Too fast, too close. Its jagged limbs struck the ground just beyond the edge of the circle, cracking stone as it drove forward, its decayed face opening wide. The portal tore open. A vortex of warped light and shadow snapped into existence, collapsing inward even as it expanded outward, swallowing the space within the circle. The pull hit instantly. Violent. Absolute. Arden felt it seize him, drag him forward. The creature's limb lashed out. Close. So close. And then he was gone. The portal snapped shut. The light vanished. The sigils burned out, and the chasm fell silent once more, except for the thing that remained. Watching. Waiting. Hungry. But with the wards of the entrance of the tomb destroyed, it had a way out at last. The portal did not close cleanly. It tore. For a fleeting instant, The world between worlds screamed, light folding inward, darkness stretching thin like rotted cloth, and then the spell snapped apart. Arden was not gently delivered back to the surface. He was expelled. The forest erupted around him as he was hurled out of nothingness, his body flung violently through the air before slamming into the earth with a dull thud. The breath was ripped from his lungs on impact. He skidded across damp soil and dead leaves, coming to a halt against the exposed roots of an ancient tree. For a long moment, he did not move. The canopy above him swayed gently, indifferent. Sunlight filtered through the leaves in fractured beams, dust motes drifting lazily in the air, as though the world had no awareness of the tear that had just occurred within it. A low groan escaped him. His fingers twitched first, curling into the dirt. Then his arm shifted, trembling with effort. Pain spread through him in slow, deliberate waves. His ribs ached, his back burned, and his head rang with a dull, persistent throb. Every breath felt shallow, as though his chest refused to fully expand. He forced himself onto one elbow. The forest spun. He stopped, eyes squeezing shut as nausea clawed its way up his throat. The memory of the chasm flashed behind his eyelids, the altar, the creature coiling, the ward flaring gold. And then it was gone, replaced by the steady hum of insects and the distant call of birds. Alive. He let himself fall back onto the ground. For a time, minutes, perhaps longer, he simply lay there, staring up through the branches. The stillness felt unreal. After the chaos, the noise, the terror, this quiet pressed against him in a different way. Not comforting, not entirely, just empty. The men. The thought came slowly. The 4 men. He didn't get up all at once. At first, it was just his fingers moving, dragging weakly through the dirt, gathering small clumps of soil beneath his nails, as if he needed leverage against the world itself. Then his arm followed, trembling violently as he forced it beneath him. Every motion felt delayed, like his body was remembering how to exist one piece at a time. A breath. Sharp. Uneven. He pushed. Pain answered immediately, flaring through his ribs and spine, but this time he didn't collapse. He rose halfway, then fully, swaying where he stood. The forest tilted around him for a moment, shadows stretching too long, trees bending at impossible angles before snapping back into place. He blinked hard, jaw tightening, willing the world to steady. It did. Barely. He took a step. The ground felt wrong under his boots, too soft, too real. Each footfall sent a dull shock up through his body, but he kept moving. Slowly at first, then with a fragile kind of determination, as though stopping might mean never starting again. The woods closed in around him. Branches clawed at his cloak as he passed, catching and pulling like they wanted to drag him back. The air was thick with damp and the scent of rote, the kind that settled in the lungs and stayed there. Somewhere in the distance, something moved, but he didn't turn to look. He couldn't afford to. Time slipped. Minutes or hours blurred together as he walked without direction, guided only by instinct and the faint pull of something just beyond his awareness. The lingering magic in his veins flickered weakly, like dying embers, nudging him forward when his body threatened to give out. Then, through the trees, a shape. At first, he thought it was another trick of his vision, a darker patch among shadows, barely there. But as he drew closer, it held its form. Lines sharpened. Angles emerged. A hut, older than it should have been to still stand. Its wooden frame leaned slightly to one side, as though it had grown tired of resisting time. The roof sagged under years of neglect, moss and creeping vines claiming it inch by inch. The door hung crooked on its hinges, half open, revealing nothing but darkness inside. He stopped a few paces away. Something about it felt wrong, not dangerous at least, not in the way the forest was, but aware. Like the structure had been waiting, patient and silent, for someone to arrive. For him. Arden swallowed, his throat dry, and took another step forward. Then another. Up close, the details only deepened the unease. Strange markings, faded, almost worn away, were carved into the wood around the doorway. Symbols he didn't immediately recognize, but that stirred something in his memory. Old magic. The kind that lingered long after its purpose was forgotten. His hand lifted slowly, hesitating just before the door. For a moment, he simply stood there, swaying slightly, the last of his strength bleeding away into the cold night air. Then, with a quiet, deliberate motion, he pushed it open. The interior was dim, lit only by the fading daylight slipping through cracks in the walls and roof. Dust coated everything. A small table stood crooked near one wall, one of its legs broken and crudely propped up with a stone. A chair lay on its side nearby. In the corner, a narrow bed, little more than a wooden frame with a thin, decayed mattress, sat untouched for what looked like years. No signs of recent life. No signs of struggle, just abandonment. He stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with the scent of old wood and damp earth, but it was shelter. Enclosed. Safe, at least in the simplest sense. That was enough. He let the door fall shut behind him. For a moment, he simply stood there, swaying slightly as the weight of exhaustion settled fully over him. Then, slowly, he made his way to the bed. The frame creaked under him as he sat, the structure threatening to give way, but it held. Barely. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, head hanging low. The silence pressed in again. Different. Now. Not the open quiet of the forest, but something closer. More contained. It wrapped around him, filling the small space of the hut. His hand drifted to his satchel. Still there. He exhaled softly, a small fragile thread of relief cutting through the exhaustion. Whatever came next, he had not lost everything. Not yet. Outside, the last light of day faded. Inside the broken hut, Arden lay back against the fragile remains of the bed, staring up at the fractured ceiling as darkness slowly claimed the room. Sleep came for him not as comfort, but as collapse. Sleep did not take him gently. It dragged him under. He was standing. The forest was gone. Stone replaced soil beneath his feet, cracked, blackened, and split open like something had tried to claw its way out from below. The air was thick with heat, unmoving, suffocating. Around him stood the town he knew all too well. Buildings, people going about their business, birds flying from rooftop to rooftop. Suddenly, a breath, sharp and trembling. He turned. They stood around him, his coven. All four of them, exactly where they had been when the spell had failed, forming that desperate circle in the town center. Their faces were frozen in the moment before the end, eyes wide, mouths parting as if caught between incantation and realization. "No," he whispered, though no sound seemed to carry. The first scream tore through the stillness. It came from one of them, a raw, animal sound that didn't belong to any human throat. His body arched violently as light began to bleed through his skin. Not from outside, from within, a faint glow at first, pulsing beneath the flesh like a heartbeat. Then brighter, sharper. Cracks formed. Not wounds, splits of light, tracing along veins, across the neck, down the arms. His skin stretched around it, unable to contain what was building beneath. Another scream joined the first, then another. All four of them. The light surged. It burned white hot, searing through them from the inside out. Their bodies convulsed, hands clawing at their own chests, their throats, as if they could tear the light free before it consumed them. But it only grew. Their eyes shone, not reflecting light, but emitting it. Blinding, merciless brightness pouring from within their skulls, spilling from their mouths as their screams broke into ragged, choking sounds. He tried to move. He couldn't. His body refused him, locked in place at the center of their circle. "I tried," he forced out, his voice strangled, barely there. I tried to hold it. They didn't hear him. Or they did, and it didn't matter. One of them turned toward him. The skin along his face split with glowing fractures, light pouring through the cracks. His expression twisted, not just in pain, but in something else. Recognition. Accusation. The scream that left him was no longer just pain. It was directed. The light peaked. For a single, suspended moment, everything held. Then they broke. Not into gore, not into ash, but into light. Their forms collapsed inward and outward at once, bodies unraveling into blinding brilliance that swallowed their shapes whole. The screams didn't stop when their bodies gave way. They stretched, distorted, echoing unnaturally, as if the sound itself refused to die. The light surged toward him. Hungry. He felt it before it touched him, the heat, the pressure, the impossible brightness forcing its way beneath his skin. His veins ignited, glowing faintly at first, then stronger. No, he looked down. The light was inside him now, tracing, spreading. His chest burned as if something was trying to claw its way out from within his ribs. A crack of light split across his arm, then another across his chest. He screamed. He woke with a violent gasp, his body jerking upright on the fragile bed. The hut was dark. Silent. His breath came in sharp, uneven bursts as his hands flew to his chest, gripping at his shirt as though expecting to feel heat, light, something breaking through his skin. There was nothing. Only the cold dampness of sweat. Only the steady, hollow thud of his own heartbeat. For a long time, he did not move, did not lie back down. He sat there in the darkness, listening, not to the forest outside, but to the echo of those screams still ringing in his mind, and beneath it, something worse. The memory of that light. Not just what it had done to them, but how it had begun inside him too. Arden broke out with a strangled sob, his chest heaving as the remnants of the nightmare clung to him like smoke. The room was silent, except for his own ragged breathing. Tears burned behind his eyes, unbidden, as he curled into himself on the edge of the bed. The echoes of the nightmare whispered still, cruel and intimate, reminding him of every failure, every loss he had buried beneath his spells and incantations. He pressed his face into the remnants of a pillow, muffling the quiet, broken sobs that spilled from him, as though the room itself had become a witness to his grief. Arden did not remember when he had finally slipped from waking into something resembling rest. It had not been true sleep, too shallow, too tense. But it had been enough for his body to recover the smallest measure of strength. He sat upright on the edge of the frail bed as the dawn settled around him. For a moment, he simply breathed. In, out. The nightmare lingered, not as images, but as a feeling. A pressure beneath his skin, a phantom heat that made his fingers twitch as if expecting light to break through them. He looked down at his hands. Still whole. Still his. That would have to be enough. He forced himself to move. His muscles protested immediately, stiff and aching from the previous day's ordeal, but they obeyed. Slowly, deliberately, he adjusted his clothes, tightening straps, pulling fabric back into place where branches had torn at it. Dirt clung stubbornly to him, but there was no time and no water to spare for vanity. Function over comfort. Survival over everything else. His satchel lay where he had left it, slumped against the wall like a forgotten thing. He reached for it, his movements more careful now, more measured. There was intent in them again. Purpose. He opened it and searched inside. His fingers found the pendant quickly. He drew it out and held it in the dim light. It was small, unassuming at a glance. A simple piece of worked metal, worn smooth at the edges from handling. But beneath that simplicity, it thrummed faintly with something deeper. The relic's magic. His grip tightened slightly. Still intact. Still responsive. Good. Next, he retrieved the map. It was folded tightly, the edges softened and creased from repeated use. When he unfolded it, the paper resisted at first, then gave way with a dry crackle. Ink lines stretched across its surface, paths, landmarks, fragments of territory marked in hurried strokes. It was not perfect, but it would be enough. He cleared a small space on the floor of the hut, brushing aside dust and debris with the side of his hand. Then he knelt, spreading the map flat against the worn wooden boards. The pendant dangled from its chain as he held it above the parchment. For a moment, he hesitated, not out of fear, out of focus. Magic like this, tracking magic, required precision. Even weakened, even exhausted, he could not afford to be careless. A misstep here would send him chasing ghosts. He steadied his breathing, closed his eyes briefly, then began. The enchantment was quiet, barely more than a murmur beneath his breath. The words were old, shaped by habit and necessity rather than ceremony. His free hand hovered just above the map, fingers slightly spread as if feeling for something unseen. The pendant reacted first. A faint tremor ran through it. Then it began to sway. At first, the movement was subtle, uncertain, like something testing its boundaries. But as the spell settled into place, the motion grew more deliberate, back and forth. Then, it shifted direction. The chain twisted slightly in his fingers as the pendant angled itself, pulling away from center. His eyes opened immediately, focused, watching. The pendant steadied, pointing, not randomly, not searching, but fixed. South. A cold weight settled in his chest. "No!" he muttered under his breath. He adjusted his hand slightly, refining the spell, sharpening the connection. The pendant responded. It pulled harder now, the sway replaced by a clear, insistent tug in a single direction. There was no hesitation in it, no confusion. The relic's magic was moving, and it was not scattered, not lost. It was being carried. He followed the direction across the map, tracing the invisible line with his eyes. His gaze moved over marked terrain, over rivers and broken paths, until it reached a point he knew all too well: the tower. Of course! His jaw tightened. They made it out, he said quietly, the realization settling into place. The 4 men. They had escaped, and they had the relic. A flicker of something complicated passed through him, relief, fleeting and unwelcome, tangled with something sharper. Something heavier. It didn't matter. Not now. What mattered was what they were doing, taking it back. Back to the tower. Back to the very place it should never have been returned to. His grip on the pendant hardened. I can't let that happen. Not after the chasm. Not after the creature. Not after what he had seen. The spell broke with a soft, almost inaudible shift in the air. The pendant stilled, hanging motionless once more. He lowered it slowly, then tucked it back into his satchel with deliberate care. The map followed, folded quickly, less neatly this time, urgency bleeding into his movements. He rose to his feet, faster than before. The stiffness was still there, the pain still lingering in his ribs and limbs, but it no longer dictated him. Purpose did. He crossed the hut in a few strides and pulled the door open. Morning light spilled in, brighter now, sharper than before. The forest beyond seemed unchanged, calm, indifferent, stretching endlessly in all directions. But now, it had direction. South. He stepped out without hesitation. The air was cooler than he expected, carrying the scent of damp earth and growing things. It filled his lungs as he drew a steady breath, grounding himself in the present. Then he began to move. At first, his pace was measured, his body testing its limits, adjusting to motion after the night's uneasy rest. But with each step, that pace increased. Not into a run. He wasn't foolish enough to burn through what little strength he had, but into something purposeful. Relentless. Branches brushed past him, undergrowth snagging at his boots as he pushed through the forest. He no longer wandered aimlessly. Every movement, every turn, was guided by the memory of the pendant's pull. South. Time blurred again, but differently now. Where before it had been a slow, dragging weight, now it slipped past him unnoticed. The rhythm of his movement steadied, his breathing falling into a controlled pattern despite the lingering pain. He ignored the discomfort, ignored the fatigue creeping back into his limbs, ignored the echo of the nightmare still clawing faintly at the edges of his mind. There was only one thought that mattered. If they reached the tower, if they handed over the relic, whatever had been set in motion beneath that chasm would not stay buried. And this time, there would be no ward strong enough, no spell cast quickly enough, no second chance. The forest thinned slightly as the day wore on, the terrain sloping gently downward. Sunlight broke through more easily here, casting longer, clearer shadows across his path. He did not slow. Could not. Somewhere ahead of him, beyond the trees and the distance, and the hours yet to pass, they were moving. Carrying something that should never have been taken, and he was already behind. He adjusted his course slightly, correcting by instinct more than sight, and he did not stop. More than half a day passed in motion. The sun had long since begun its descent, bleeding orange and gold through the thinning trees, before finally slipping beneath the horizon. Darkness followed quickly after, settling into the forest not as a sudden absence of light, but as a slow, encroaching presence that filled every space between the branches. By then, Arden was running on something thinner than strength, momentum, and will. The pendant had changed. At first, it had only been a faint sensation, an occasional tremor against his chest, subtle enough that it could have been mistaken for imagination. But as the hours passed, the feeling sharpened. It began to vibrate. Not constantly, but in pulses. Each one brief, deliberate, like a heartbeat that did not belong to him. He felt it now again as he moved through the dark. A low hum against his sternum. Closer. He slowed instinctively, his steps becoming quieter, more deliberate. The forest at night was alive with sound, crickets, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of something unseen. But beneath it all, his focus narrowed. Another pulse. Stronger this time. He pressed a hand briefly against the pendant through his clothing, as if to steady it or himself. "They're close," he murmured under his breath. He extinguished what little noise he made. Each step became measured, calculated. He placed his feet with care, avoiding loose branches, shifting weight slowly to prevent the telltale crunch of dry leaves. His breathing softened, drawn in through his nose, released just as carefully. The forest thickened again here, shadows pooling heavily between the trees. Visibility was poor, but that worked in his favor. Another vibration, stronger still. Then, voices. Faint, carried unevenly through the trees. He froze instantly. Every muscle in his body went still, his head tilting slightly as he listened. The voices were low, rough with exhaustion, but unmistakable. Men. 4 of them. Alive! A flicker of something passed through him, relief, sharp and unwelcome. But it was quickly buried beneath something harder. Focus. He moved again, slower now. Closer. The trees began to thin just enough to reveal a dim, flickering glow ahead. Firelight. He crouched instinctively, lowering himself behind a cluster of dense brush. From there, he inched forward until the source of the light came into view. A small clearing. Rough, uneven, and occupied. The camp was crude, thrown together with the kind of haste that came from exhaustion rather than planning. 2 makeshift tents had been erected from cloaks and branches, sagging slightly under their own weight. A small fire burned low at the center, its flames reduced to a cautious flicker, more ember than blaze, just enough to provide warmth without drawing too much attention. Around it sat the 4 men. He recognized them immediately. Their postures told the story before their words did. They were not at ease. One of them sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees, staring into the fire as if expecting something to rise from it. Another paced slowly at the edge of the clearing, his movements restless, agitated. The remaining 2 sat closer together, speaking in low, tense voices. "I'm telling you, the thing knew we were there," one of them said, his voice tight, strained. "It was blind, Another replied quickly, though there was no conviction in it. It didn't need eyes, the first snapped. You felt it, same as I did, the way its gaze locked onto us. A brief silence followed, heavy, uncomfortable. Then a third voice, quieter, and Melv. The words hung in the air. Their friend, his corpse still down in that crypt, unfinished, but understood. The pacing man stopped, his back to the others. His shoulders rose and fell with a slow, controlled breath. "We don't talk about that," he said. Not harsh, but final. The others didn't argue. Arden remained in the shadows, unmoving, watching, listening. The pendant thrummed again, sharp now, insistent. There was no doubt anymore. The relic was here. In that camp. His gaze shifted, scanning carefully. Not the men. Their belongings. Packs lay scattered near the tents, some half open, others tightly bound. Weapons leaned against logs or rested within arm's reach. A water skin hung from a low branch, swaying faintly in the night air. Nothing obvious. No glow. No visible sign of the relic, which meant hidden or carried. He narrowed his eyes slightly, focusing on each man in turn. The one by the fire, too still, too distant. Shock, perhaps. The pacing one, alert, agitated, but unburdened. The two seated together, one of them shifted. And as he did, the firelight caught something beneath his cloak. A faint outline, subtle, but there. Something small, hanging close to his chest. The pendant at Arden's own neck pulsed sharply in response. "There, we shouldn't be taking it back," the man with the hidden object muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. The others looked at him. "What else are we supposed to do?" came the reply, return empty-handed. "We barely got out as it is," another added. "We bring it back, we hand it over, and we forget this ever happened." The fire crackled softly between them. No one answered, because they all knew. This didn't end cleanly. It never did. Arden shifted slightly in the shadows, adjusting his position for a better view. His body ached in protest, fatigue pulling at him with renewed insistence, but he ignored it. His focus remained locked on the man carrying the relic. Arden weighed his options. 4 of them. One of him. Exhausted. Injured. Even with magic. Even with surprise. This was not a fight he could afford to rush into blindly. He exhaled slowly, carefully. Watching. Waiting. The fire dipped lower, the men's voices fading into quieter murmurs as exhaustion began to take hold. One by one, they shifted, settling, lying down, retreating into uneasy rest. But not all of them slept. The pacing man remained awake, now seated at the edge of the clearing, a blade resting loosely in his hand as his eyes scanned the surrounding darkness. Alert. Guarding. Arden's gaze flicked between him and the man holding the relic. Then back again, calculating. The pendant pulsed once more against his chest. Strong. Close. Within reach. He did not move. Not yet. Instead, he sank deeper into the shadows, becoming still once more, another shape among the trees, unseen, unheard. Patient. The night stretched on around the camp, thick with tension and unspoken fear, and just beyond the firelight, Arden watched. Waiting for the moment when the balance shifted, waiting for the smallest mistake, waiting to take back what should never have left the chasm. The night wore on slowly. The fire shrank to embers, its glow dimming until it barely painted the edges of the clearing. One by one, the men surrendered to exhaustion. Their voices faded, their movements stilled, until only the quiet rhythm of breathing remained. Only one resisted sleep. The guard pacing one. He sat with his back to a tree, blade resting across his lap, eyes half-lidded, but never fully closing. The kind of vigilance born not from discipline, but from fear. Arden watched him for a long time, measured the rhythm of his breaths, the way his head dipped, then jerked slightly as he caught himself, again and again. Fatigue was winning, slowly, inevitably, time passed. Minutes stretched thin. The forest whispered around them, insects droning softly, leaves shifting in the faintest breeze. The guard's posture slackened by degrees. His grip on the blade, loosening as sleep crept in despite his efforts. Then his head dipped and did not rise again. Arden moved. Silently, he slipped from the deeper shadows, each step placed with surgical care. He kept low, his body angled, minimizing his silhouette against the dim firelight. His breathing slowed, controlled to the point of near stillness. Closer. The camp now felt larger from within its edge, the space between each man stretched with risk. Every small sound seemed amplified, every shift of weight a potential mistake. He ignored it. Focused. The man with the relic lay on his side, half turned toward the fire, one arm draped loosely across his chest. Close to it. Too close for hands. Not for magic. Arden stopped several paces away. Far enough. He raised his hands slightly, not high. Not dramatic. Just enough. His fingers parted, subtle, deliberate. And he reached. The air responded. It always did. At first, it was nothing more than a faint distortion, like heat rising from stone. Then it gathered, tightening, shaping itself into something finer. A thread? No. A tendril, invisible to the eye, but tangible to him. It slipped forward, slow and careful, gliding over the ground without disturbing a single leaf. He guided it with minute movements of his fingers, inch by inch, closing the distance between himself and the sleeping man. Closer. Closer. There. The relic. The tendril brushed against it. The pendant at Arden's chest pulsed in immediate recognition. He tightened his control. The air curled, wrapping delicately around the relic, finding purchase without force. Slowly, he pulled. The relic shifted. Barely. Just enough. The man's eyes snapped open. Instantly. No confusion. No grogginess. Just raw, instinctive awareness. His hand shot to his chest, fingers closing around empty fabric as he felt it, the movement, the absence, the wrongness. What? His voice broke the silence like a blade. He lunged. The relic jerked violently as his hand collided with it mid-motion, gripping it tight even as the unseen force continued to pull. The chain went tight. For a split second, the relic hung suspended between them, caught between magic and flesh. Then the man shouted, "Get up!" Someone's. The camp exploded into motion. The others stirred instantly, confusion turning to alarm in a heartbeat as they scrambled to their feet, reaching for weapons, eyes darting wildly through the darkness. Arden reacted. Now. He thrust his hand forward. Not subtle this time. Not precise. Forceful. A sharp weave of air surged outward, slamming into the ground just before the man holding the relic. Dust and ash erupted upward in a violent burst, a choking cloud driven directly into the man's face. He screamed, recoiling instinctively, his grip breaking as he threw an arm up to shield his eyes. The relic slipped free. Arden didn't hesitate. He surged forward, closing the remaining distance in a few quick strides. His hand shot out, fingers closing tightly around the relic. Contact. Real. Solid. A jolt ran through him as the magic within it recognized him again, faint but undeniable. He turned sharply, already moving. Too late. They were faster than he'd hoped. There. One of them had seen him. Then all of them had. They spread quickly, instinctively forming a loose circle as they closed in, weapons drawn, cutting off his path before he could retreat fully into the trees. The guard, now fully awake, stepped in last, blade raised, eyes locked onto him with a sharp, burning focus. Recognition hit them almost at once. "You," one of them breathed, disbelief cutting through the tension. The pacing man from earlier, now very much awake, narrowed his eyes. "How long have you been following us?" The question wasn't casual. It was dangerous. Arden said nothing. He adjusted his stance slightly, the relic held tight in one hand, his other already beginning to shift, preparing, just in case. Their expressions hardened. "That's what I thought," another muttered, a beat of silence. "Then he knows. If he's all the way out here, trying to take the relic, he knows," someone else said. Not just about the relic, about the chasm, the creature, everything. The realization passed between them like a silent agreement, unspoken, but absolute. The man with the dust-streaked face wiped at his eyes, still blinking furiously, but his voice came through clear enough. "We can't let him walk away." No one argued. Not one. Steel shifted in the dim light as grips tightened, stances lowered, 4 against 1. And this time, there was no confusion, no hesitation. Arden straightened slowly. The relic hung heavy in his grasp. His chest rose and fell once, twice. Then he spoke, his voice low, steady despite everything. "You don't understand what you're doing. A mistake. Maybe. Or maybe it didn't matter." One of them scoffed, taking a step closer. "We understand enough." Another shifted to flank him further. "And we understand you know too much." Pause. Then, quiet and final. "So we fix that." The forest held its breath. The fire crackled faintly behind them. And in the center of the clearing, the line was drawn. They moved first. They didn't hesitate. Steel came first. A blade flashed through the dim firelight, cutting low and fast toward his ribs. Another followed from the opposite side, an axe, heavier, slower, but far more unforgiving. The third came straight on, a hammer raised high, aimed to crush rather than cut. Arden moved on instinct. His hand snapped upward, fingers tightening as he pulled at the air itself. A sharp pulse. The blade struck something unseen and veered off course with a harsh metallic screech, sparks biting into the darkness. The axe met resistance next, its momentum stuttering mid-swing as if it had struck a wall that wasn't there. The hammer, he barely caught it. The impact drove through his hastily formed barrier, the force slamming into him even as the spell softened it. He staggered back, boots digging into the dirt, breath hitching as pain flared through his already battered body. Too slow, too tired, but still standing. They pressed him immediately. No space. No pause. The guard came again, faster this time, blade snapping toward his shoulder. Arden twisted, raising a second weave, thinner, sharper, deflecting the strike just enough that it grazed rather than bit deep. Still, it cut. A thin line of pain burned across his arm, warm blood following a moment later. He hissed through his teeth, returned it. His hand flicked outward. The air coiled and snapped like a whip, striking one of the men across the chest. The force knocked him back a step, breath leaving him in a harsh grunt, but not enough. Not nearly enough. They were seasoned, hardened, used to fighting things stronger than themselves. And right now, he wasn't stronger. The axe came again. He ducked this time, the blade tearing through the air just above his head, close enough that he felt the wind of it. He drove his shoulder forward in the same motion, slamming into the wielder's chest. The man stumbled, but caught himself, always recovering, always pressing. A boot struck his side, hard. He hadn't seen it. The impact sent him reeling, his balance breaking as he dropped to one knee. Pain flared up his ribs, sharp and immediate, stealing his breath. Now, the hammer descended. He reacted without thought. Both hands surged upward, dragging every thread of strength he had left into a single, desperate weave. The air condensed, hardened, and the hammer struck it with a thunderous crack. It became chaos, steel, breath, magic, pain. They circled, pressed, withdrew, struck again. Each exchange cost him. A cut along his side where a blade slipped through his defenses. A bruise blooming across his back from a glancing blow. A sharp, biting pain in his thigh where he hadn't moved quite fast enough. But he gave back what he could. A burst of air that knocked one man flat, a sudden pull that dragged another off balance, sending him crashing into the fire pit. A sharp, concussive strike that forced the hammer wielder back with a grunt of pain. Still, it wasn't enough. 4 against 1. And he was breaking. They knew it. He saw it in the way they moved now. Less cautious, more confident. They were testing him, pushing harder, probing for the moment he faltered completely. And that moment was coming. Fast. Then, something shifted. The attack slowed. Not stopped, but hesitated. A blade came at him, then withdrew. The hammer raised, then lowered. The men stepped back. Not far, just enough. The realization came to them not as panic, but as instinct sharpened by survival. Steel would not win this. The 4 men, already breathing hard, already feeling the drain in their limbs, exchanged no words, yet understood each other completely. Every clash had cost them more than it had cost him. Every strike met with unseen force, every advance slowed by invisible pressure. Arden wasn't tiring the way they were. One of them lowered his blade first. Arden noticed it, of course. He noticed everything. His stance shifted, subtle but immediate, weight adjusting as he prepared for another spell. Perhaps he thought it was surrender. Perhaps he thought they were breaking. He was wrong. The second man let his weapon fall. Then the third. The fourth didn't bother. His grip simply loosened as his body began to betray its human shape. It started small. A tremor in the hands. Fingers curling inward, then stretching unnaturally long. The sound came next. A wet, cracking series of pops beneath the skin as bone reshaped itself. Shoulders hunched, spines bowed, ribs expanding with a force that forced harsh, animalistic breaths from their throats. Arden's confidence faltered. For the first time, his composure slipped, not dramatically, but enough. His brow tightened beneath the shadow of his hood. The air around his hands, once steady with controlled power, flickered unevenly. He hadn't expected this. Not here. Not from them. The transformation accelerated. Clothing strained and tore as bodies expanded, muscles swelling beneath skin that rippled like something alive beneath it. Their jaws extended, teeth forcing their way into sharper, longer shapes. Low growls bled into existence, no longer human, no longer restrained. It was violent. It was unstoppable. And it was fast. Arden took a step back. That was all it took. Instinct surged through him, not fear exactly, but something close enough. Calculation replaced control. 4 opponents had just become something entirely different, something far more dangerous at close range. His magic could repel steel, deflect blades, crush bone, but speed, raw strength, unpredictability, that changed everything. He didn't hesitate again, the moment their transformation consumed their focus, when their bodies were caught between shapes, when control gave way to instinct. Arden turned and ran. Air bent around him as he pushed forward, his boots barely seeming to touch the ground. Branches whipped past, the forest swallowing him as he forced distance between himself and the nightmare unfolding behind him. The first of the werewolves hit the ground on all 4s. The second followed, claws tearing into the earth as it stabilized. The third let out a guttural snarl that echoed through the trees. The 4th raised its head last, eyes already searching. They didn't pursue immediately. For a brief, suspended moment, they adjusted, new limbs, new balance, new senses flooding in all at once. The forest changed for them. Smells sharpened. Sounds stretched. The world slowed into something clearer, more precise. And then, they found him, not by sight. By scent. The lead werewolf's head snapped toward the direction Arden had fled, nostrils flaring as it locked onto the trail. A low growl rolled from its chest, deeper now, more certain. Branches snapped somewhere behind him, too heavy for falling wood, too deliberate for chance. Arden didn't look back. He didn't need to. The sound alone told him everything. They had found their rhythm. And they were fast. He forced more speed into his stride, drawing on the air itself. It pressed against his back, coiling and releasing in bursts that carried him forward in unnatural surges. Leaves scattered in his wake, the ground barely holding his weight as he skimmed over roots and stone. Then, a shift. Not sound, not sight. Pressure, a sudden, violent displacement in the air to his left. He turned too late. Something massive slammed into him with bone-crushing force. The impact ripped him off his feet and hurled him sideways through the undergrowth. He struck the ground hard, shoulder first, the breath driven violently from his lungs as he rolled once, twice, branches snapping beneath him before he crashed to a stop against the base of a tree. Pain flared, sharp and immediate, but he was already moving. Training, instinct, survival, whatever name it took, it pulled him upright before the pain could root him in place. His boots dug into the soil as he forced himself up, one hand already rising, fingers curling as the air around him began to twist. Too late. The werewolf was already there. It didn't slow. It didn't hesitate. A blur of muscle and fury, it launched itself at him, jaws open, claws extended, its full weight committed to the kill. Arden exhaled sharply and pushed. The air between them didn't simply move, it detonated. A concussive blast erupted from his outstretched hand, invisible but violently real, striking the creature mid-lunge. The force hit like a wall. The werewolf's body twisted unnaturally as the momentum was ripped away from it, sending it crashing sideways into the forest floor. It hit hard, rolled, scrambled. For a split second, it faltered, claws digging into the dirt as it fought to regain its footing, a disoriented snarl tearing from its throat. Arden didn't wait. He shifted his stance, drawing breath, gathering himself, another presence. He felt it before he saw it. The second werewolf burst through the trees with terrifying speed, far closer than it should have been. There was no pause, no adjustment, only immediate violence. Its arms swung in a wide, lethal arc, claws slicing through the air where his chest had been a fraction of a second earlier. He twisted away. The strike passed so close he felt the air tear against his skin. Another swing came instantly, faster, tighter, aimed to finish what the first had missed. He stepped inside it. Too close for the full force of the blow, the claws grazing fabric instead of flesh as he slipped past the attack, his movements precise, controlled, barely enough. But he couldn't keep this up. Two of them now, one recovering, one relentless. He needed to end this, now. Arden planted his foot and stopped retreating. For the first time since the pursuit began, he stood his ground. The werewolf lunged again. This time, he didn't move. His hand rose, not in panic, but in certainty. The air changed. There was no slow build, no visible gathering, just a sudden, violent shift as something vast and electric answered his call. A crack split the forest. Blinding light tore through the canopy as a bolt of lightning came down, not from the sky alone, but drawn, focused, guided, a spear of raw energy driven straight through the space between them. It struck the werewolf in the chest. Directly. The impact was instantaneous. Its body seized mid-motion, momentum halting, as if the world itself had locked around it. Then it hit the ground. Hard. The smell came next. Burnt air, scorched flesh. The werewolf convulsed once. A single involuntary spasm that ran through its entire body. Then nothing. Its limbs fell still. Its chest did not rise again. The heart that had driven it, fierce, relentless, had simply stopped. Silence rushed in to fill the space the thunder had torn open. Arden stood there, breathing hard now, the strain finally beginning to show. His hand lowered slowly, fingers trembling faintly from the force he had just commanded. Behind him, the first werewolf had regained its footing, and it had seen everything. The body on the ground, the smoke still rising from its chest, the mage standing over it. A low, furious growl began to build, the forest did not return to calm. It tightened. The crack of lightning still echoed faintly through the trees, the smell of scorched earth hanging thick in the air, but it was already fading beneath something heavier. Something alive. The remaining werewolf stood over the fallen body of its packmate, chest rising and falling in slow, deliberate breaths. Its gaze locked onto Arden, not with blind fury, but with a sharpened, focused intent. Then the forest shifted again. 2 more shapes emerged from the trees. They did not crash through like the second had. They moved low, controlled, silent, except for the faint disturbance of leaves beneath their weight. The third came from the left, circling wide. The fourth from the right, slower, more deliberate, its head lowered as it studied Arden with unsettling patience. They had him now. 3 against 1. Arden straightened, forcing his breathing under control despite the strain clawing at his chest. His mind moved quickly, recalculating, adjusting, distance, angles, timing. His hand lifted again, fingers twitching as unseen currents gathered around him. No hesitation this time. The first werewolf lunged. He shifted with it, the air bending around his body as he stepped just outside the path of the attack. Its claws cut through empty space, missing him by inches as he twisted past its flank. His palm snapped forward, compressed air striking the creature's ribs with a sharp, concussive impact that staggered it sideways. But it didn't fall. It recovered instantly. The second came in from the right, faster than expected. A blur of motion, claws aimed high, his throat, his face. He dropped low, the strike tearing through the space above him as he swept his arm upward. The air surged again, not explosive this time, but focused, lifting, unbalancing. The werewolf's footing slipped just enough for him to drive his shoulder into its midsection, forcing it back a step. Still not enough. They were adapting. The third moved in. No wild lunge, no reckless strike, just a sudden, precise advance. It swiped low, forcing him to retreat, then high, forcing him to shift again. Each movement pushed him further off balance, each second tightening the space around him. He struck back when he could. A burst of air to the shoulder of one, snapping its upper body sideways. A sharp, focused blast to another's leg, forcing it to falter for half a step. Small openings, nothing decisive, nothing that slowed them for long. They didn't break. They didn't hesitate. They pressed. Arden's movements became sharper, faster, less controlled, more reactive. He twisted away from one strike, ducked another, spun as claws raked through the space he had just occupied. The air around him pulsed with each motion, bending, deflecting, buying him fractions of time, but it was slipping. Too many angles, too many bodies, too fast. And then, a mistake. He shifted to avoid the one in front of him, committed to the movement, focused on the immediate threat, and missed the one behind him. It came out of nowhere. A heavy impact slammed into his back, driving him forward before he could react. The force sent him crashing to the ground, the breath torn from him as he hit hard, chest first, the earth unforgiving beneath him. He tried to push up. Too late. Weight crashed down onto him. Massive. Crushing. A clawed hand drove into his back, pinning him flat against the ground. The pressure forced a strained gasp from his throat, his body refusing to respond as quickly as his mind demanded. The werewolf didn't rush. It pressed down harder. Then, slowly, it shifted its grip. Its claws dug in, not slashing, but holding, hooking into fabric, into flesh beneath as it began to turn him. The movement was deliberate, controlled, dragging him onto his back, despite his resistance. Pain flared sharp and immediate. He cried out, unable to stop it, as his body was forced over, his arms scrambling for leverage that wasn't there. The forest spun for a moment. Then he was staring up at it. The werewolf loomed above him, its weight still pinning him down, one arm planted firmly across his torso. Its face hovered just above his, breath hot, ragged, teeth bared in something that wasn't quite a snarl. Something worse. Intent. Its other hand moved. Slowly. Deliberately. Arden saw it coming, but his body lagged behind his awareness. His muscles tensed, his hands pushing, trying to gather something, anything, to throw it off. Too late again. The claws drove into his side. Not a slash. A plunge. Sharp, curved talons forced through cloth and into flesh, the pressure sudden and deep enough to tear a raw, uncontrolled scream from him. His body arched involuntarily, the pain overwhelming, blinding for a split second as the creature held him there, pinned, helpless. The werewolf didn't pull away. It kept its grip. The pressure twisted slightly, just enough to deepen the pain, to force another strained cry from his throat as his hands snapped up, grabbing at its arm, pushing, striking, trying to force it back. Behind them, the other two circled. Slow. Measured. They did not rush in. They did not interfere. They watched. One paced to his left, head low, eyes fixed on him with cold focus. The other moved to his right, cutting off any angle of escape, its claws flexing as it waited, ready for the moment he slipped, the moment the one pinning him loosened its hold. Arden's movements grew frantic. Controlled precision was gone, replaced by raw urgency. His hands pushed against the werewolf's arm, his fingers digging in, slipping against fur and muscle as he tried to pry it off. The air around him flickered unevenly, struggling to respond as his focus fractured under the weight of pain. He tried to breathe, tried to think. But the pressure didn't ease. The claws remained buried. And the wolves were not done. The forest carried sound differently at night. It did not simply echo, it guided. Through dense trunks and layered undergrowth, through the slow sway of branches and the hush of distant wind, something broke the natural rhythm. A disturbance. Not the ordinary violence of predator and prey, but something sharper, louder. Wrong. Calum heard it long before he saw anything. A crack of displaced air, a distant, unnatural thunder. Then, faint at first, but unmistakable, a scream. He stopped mid-step. The forest around him stilled with him, as if even the insects and night birds understood the shift. His head tilted slightly, eyes narrowing as he listened, not just with his ears, but with something deeper, older. Snarling followed. Multiple voices, not scattered, not hunting calls, focused, together. His jaw tightened. Not his pack. That much was clear immediately. The scent carried on the wind confirmed it a moment later, foreign, sharp, layered with the musk of transformation and aggression. It cut through the natural smells of the forest like a blade. Trespassers. And not just passing through. Hunting. Calum moved. At first, it was controlled, a steady, silent advance through the trees. His steps were deliberate, each placement exact, barely disturbing the ground beneath him. But the closer he got, the clearer it became. The flicker of light ahead, erratic, unnatural. Another scream. Closer now. Pain. His pace quickened. Branches brushed past him as he wove through the forest with growing urgency, his breathing steady but deeper now, something building beneath the surface. The sound sharpened with every step, the guttural snarls, the low circling growls, the unmistakable tone of something being held down, cornered. The last stretch disappeared beneath him in a blur. He broke through the tree line and saw it. 3 werewolves. One pinned a man on the forest floor, its body hunched, claws buried deep as it held him down. The man beneath it writhed, struggling, his movements frantic, uneven, the air around him flickering with unstable force. The other 2 circled, waiting, watching, coordinated, efficient. The flicker of residual lightning still clung faintly to the air, illuminating the scene in brief, ghost-like flashes. The scent of burnt flesh lingered, mixing with fresh blood and churned earth. Calum didn't think. He didn't call out. He didn't warn. His body moved before conscious thought could catch up. The shift began instantly. Bones cracked, not violently, but with a deep, resonant finality. His frame expanded, muscle layering over muscle as his posture dropped and lengthened. His hands became claws mid-motion, his stride breaking into something faster, heavier, unstoppable. His vision sharpened. The world narrowed. Target. The werewolf pinning, Arden never saw him coming. Calum hit it like a falling tree. The impact was explosive, raw force driven through muscle and momentum. His shoulder slammed into the creature's side, tearing it off Arden with enough power to send it crashing across the forest floor. It struck hard, rolling through dirt and leaves before skidding to a stop several meters away. The weight lifted. The pressure vanished. Arden was free, but only for a moment, because everything stopped. The circling wolves froze mid-step. Their attention snapped instantly, away from Arden, away from the kill they had nearly secured to him. Calum straightened slowly. Fully transformed now, he stood taller than the others, broader, heavier, his presence filling the space with something that wasn't just physical. His chest rose with a slow, controlled breath, his gaze locked onto them with cold, unmistakable authority. Not prey. Not rival hunters. Something else entirely. The forest itself seemed to hold still around him. The wolf he had struck pushed itself up, shaking off the impact with a low, disoriented snarl, but it didn't charge. Not yet. Its eyes flicked to Calum, uncertainty threading through its aggression for the first time. The other two adjusted their positions. Not circling anymore. Facing him. Measuring. A low growl rolled from Calum's chest, not loud, not wild, but deep enough to carry weight. A warning. A statement. This territory was not theirs. The message didn't need words. The tension snapped tight in the space between them, the air thick with the promise of violence. Behind Calum, Arden, still on the ground, struggled for breath, the sound sharp and uneven, but for now, forgotten. Because the hunt had shifted again. And this time, they were no longer the ones in control. For a single, suspended heartbeat, nothing moved. Then everything did. The tension snapped. All three werewolves surged forward at once. No hesitation, no more uncertainty. Whatever instinct had warned them now drowned beneath aggression and pack fury. They came from different angles, fast and coordinated, aiming to overwhelm. Calum met them head-on. He didn't retreat. He lunged. The collision was immediate and violent, muscle crashing into muscle, the forest floor shuddering beneath the impact. His claws struck first, raking across one attacker's shoulder with enough force to twist its body sideways. Before it could recover, he pivoted, driving his weight into another, slamming it back a step. He moved differently than they did. Not just strength, control. Each motion had purpose. Each strike landed where it mattered. A swipe came for his flank. He turned into it, minimizing the impact as claws scraped across him instead of tearing deep. He answered with a brutal backhand that sent the attacker stumbling, its footing breaking for a split second. That was all he needed, he pressed. A forward surge. His claws drove into the chest of one wolf, forcing it back with a low, pained snarl. Another tried to flank him, jaws snapping for his shoulder. He twisted away at the last moment, the bite grazing instead of locking in. But they were still dangerous, still fast. One managed to land a hit, claws cutting across his side, drawing a sharp reaction as he shifted back a fraction too late. Another struck low, forcing him to adjust his stance as pressure built from multiple sides. They were trying to box him in again. And then, one broke away, not toward him, towards Arden. The movement was sudden, opportunistic, the injured Arden still on the ground, still struggling to recover. An easy kill compared to the four standing in front of them. The wolf lunged. It never reached him. Calum moved faster. He intercepted mid-charge, his hands snapping out with precise, brutal timing. His claws wrapped around the creature's head, fingers locking in with unyielding force as momentum carried them both forward. Then he stopped it. Completely. Caelim's muscles flexing as he drives his claws deeper into the other werewolf's skull. Its cries grew from growls to sickening screams as Caelim's claws drive deeper into his head, blood pouring out of every entry point of the alpha's claws. Then the audible crush of bone starts filling the forest, the werewolf frantically trying to break free but not being able to. Under Caelim's powerful grip, the skull of the werewolf starts to become malform as it gets crushed. The resistance weakened, then ceased. He released it, letting the body fall still against the forest floor. No flourish, no pause. Because the other two had already seen, and they came again, together. This time, there was no circling, no measured advance, only full commitment. They lunged in unison, aiming to overwhelm him through sheer force. Caelim answered in kind. He surged forward to meet them. The impact was heavier this time, more desperate, more chaotic. Jaws snapped inches from his throat as he drove into them, claws striking, bodies colliding in a tangle of motion and force. One caught him across the shoulder. He ignored it. Another pressed in low. He dropped his weight, slamming it down hard into the ground beneath him. The impact knocked the air from it, its limbs scrambling as it tried to recover. The second came in immediately. Too quickly, too aggressively. It lunged without fully accounting for his position, its angle off, its timing rushed. Mistake. Caelim seized it. He turned into the attack, closing the distance instead of retreating. His jaws clamped down, not wild, not frenzied, but precise and final. The motion halted the attack instantly, Caelim's claws digging deep into its throat. With a swift movement, he ripped the werewolf's throat straight out of its body. The werewolf stumbles, clawing at its own throat as he tries to gurgle in air through a throat that was no longer there. Caelim gives a quick glance to the part of the esophagus he was holding onto, dropping it onto the ground. The werewolf's body dropped, unmoving. Silence threatened to creep back in, but not yet. The last werewolf struggled beneath him, forcing itself up despite the impact. It pushed against the ground, claws digging in, trying to regain its footing, a strained snarl forcing its way out as it refused to yield. He didn't give it the chance. He stepped forward, closing the gap in a single motion. His arm moved in a controlled arc, claws dragging across the creature's midsection, not wild, not excessive, but decisive. The werewolf faltered. Its movement slowed. A low, pained sound escaped it as its strength gave way, its body sinking back to the forest floor. A deep gash ran horizontally across its abdomen. Slowly, his intestines starts pouring out. The fight drained out of it. Gradually. Then completely. And just like that, it was over. The forest stilled once more. Only the sound of breathing remained, heavy, controlled. Caelim stood in the center of it, his chest rising and falling as the last traces of movement faded around him. His gaze lingered on the fallen forms for a moment longer, ensuring none would rise again. Then, slowly, he turned. Back towards Arden. The silence that followed felt heavier than the fight itself. For a few moments, Caelim remained where he stood, his breath still deep and measured, the last remnants of tension slowly unwinding from his body. The forest had gone still again. No snarls, no movement, only the faint rustle of leaves overhead and the distant whisper of wind through the trees. Then the shift began. It came more slowly this time. The power receded in controlled waves, his towering frame contracting as bone and muscle reshaped with quiet, deliberate cracks. Fur withdrew, claws shortened, his posture rising as the beast gave way to the man beneath. When it was done, Caelim stood once more in human form, bare, marked by the fight, but steady. Arden lay where he had fallen, half curled against the forest floor, his breathing uneven and shallow. Blood darkened his clothing, spreading slowly, steadily, too steadily. His body trembled faintly, not with strength, but with what little remained of it slipping away. Calum stepped closer, lowering himself beside him. For a moment, he said nothing, only observed. His eyes traced the injuries with quiet precision, assessing without panic. The wounds were deep, poorly placed for survival without intervention. The breathing ragged, the response fading, dying. But not yet. His gaze flicked briefly to the side, to the body of the werewolf struck by lightning. Even in death, the mark of it was clear. The stillness, the unnatural finality. Then back to the man, a mage. Not just any, strong enough to bring one of them down alone. Strong enough to survive as long as he had against 3 more. That changed things. Curiosity stirred, not idle, but deliberate. Whoever this man was, he was no ordinary trespasser. Calum exhaled quietly and reached forward. "Stay with me," he muttered, though he knew the words likely wouldn't land. His hands moved carefully, sliding beneath the Arden's back and shoulders. The moment he began to lift him, the reaction came. A low, broken sound tore from Arden's throat, something between a scream and a gasp, dragged out by pain rather than intent. His body tensed sharply, what little strength he had left flaring in protest. Then it broke into a wet, choking cough. Blood touched his lips as the sound cut short. Calum paused instantly. "Easy," he said, quieter now. He adjusted his grip, slower this time, more deliberate. One arm supported the man's back, avoiding the worst of the injuries, the other steadying him beneath his legs. He lifted again, carefully controlling every inch of movement. Arden didn't resist this time. The tension drained from him almost immediately, his body going slack as consciousness slipped further away. His head tilted forward, then to the side, coming to rest weakly against Calum's chest. His breathing remained faint, uneven, but still there, alive. Barely. Calum steadied him, tightening his hold just enough to keep him secure without adding pressure. His gaze lingered on the man's face for a moment, pale, strained, marked by what he had just endured. Then he stood. There was no hesitation now. He turned toward the deeper forest, the direction of home. His pace was controlled but urgent, each step sure despite the terrain. He avoided the worst of the undergrowth, moving with practiced ease even while carrying the added weight. The forest seemed to part for him in quiet familiarity, the path known even in darkness. Time stretched. The sounds of the battle faded completely behind him, replaced by the steady rhythm of his own movement and the faint, fragile breathing against his chest. Once or twice, Arden stirred faintly, small, involuntary movements, a flicker of consciousness trying and failing to return. Each time, Calum adjusted his hold instinctively, keeping him stable, minimizing the strain. "Not yet," he murmured once, more to himself than the man. The first signs of the village came gradually, a shift in scent, wood smoke, faint but distinct. Then light. Soft, warm glows between the trees, steady and grounded in contrast to the violent flicker of magic from before. Calum didn't slow as he approached. Figures at the edge of the settlement noticed him quickly, heads turning, posture sharpening as they took in his expression, the urgency in his stride, the man in his arms. No questions were asked. "Not yet." "Healers," Calum said simply as he passed, his voice low but carrying enough weight to move people aside instantly. They understood. A path opened. He moved straight through the village, toward the larger structure at its center, familiar necessary. The door was already being opened as he approached, light spilling outward to meet him. Inside, the air shifted again, warmer, cleaner, purposeful. He stepped in without breaking stride. "He's alive," Calum said, firm despite the uncertainty beneath it. But not for long. He lowered the witch carefully, gently onto the prepared surface as the healers moved in around them, hands already assessing, voices low and focused, no wasted motion. Only then did Calum step back, just enough to give them space. But he didn't leave. His gaze remained fixed on the man, this stranger who had fought like something far more than he appeared, who had survived long enough to be worth saving, and now might yet live if they were fast enough.